Hey guys, today I'm just going to go over a simple CLI built in Python with the click package. There's two ways to install it. You can do pip install editable, which will use the setup.py that I wrote. But what I think is a little bit easier is to just alias the command to pylift, just so you don't have to install anything locally. So here I just aliased it to the main.py. So here I just have this and it runs the command CLI. So if I do pylift, I get the same output as if I did main.py. And the measurements here are a little bit obscure, but I think that it's fairly self-explanatory once you understand it. So when you're estimating your 1 rep max, let's say you do 10 reps at 225 pounds. For some exercise, your estimated 1 rep max is 300. And this is an important measurement because it's used a lot to calculate how much weight you should use in certain rep ranges. But the one good thing about it is that you can estimate it without having to attempt it, because it is, a little bit dangerous to try to use as much weight as possible. That's when most injuries occur, when people are going really heavy. So estimating it, if you're unsure, you're starting out, is always a good start. But once you get more advanced, you can start testing your 1 rep max. And one of the things that's good about it is you can use it to calculate relative intensities, or how much kind of perceived effort you're using. An example of that would be if I can only do 10 reps of a weight, that's 100% relative intensity. Just like doing 1 rep, if I can only do 1 rep, is 100% relative intensity. And absolute intensity is the percentage of your 1 rep max. And a lot of people focus on absolute intensity, but you want to kind of increase and slowly train relative intensity instead. So an example would be if I were to do pylift rel int here, and I did 10 reps at 225, my 1 rep max is 300. You can see my relative intensity is 100%, but my absolute intensity is only 75%. So it seems like it might be easier than just doing 1 rep of 300, but in perceived effort, it should be approximately the same. And the other thing that this function does is it can create little CSVs for you. So if I did pylift new lift, something like bench, it creates it, and you specify the directory with a little configuration file, and it will populate that directory if it exists. If it doesn't exist, it'll throw an error. So if I want to look at squat, I think I added some dummy data. I hurt my back, so I haven't been lifting. Ironically, that happened right around when I finished this little package, so I haven't really been able to use it, but I just put some dummy data here where I have dates and I have weight, and you can use whichever format you like. You just have to have a blank line between each day. Let me go here and just lower this back down and then increase this up a little bit. Let me just do, I'll just make this 40 just to give an accurate, maybe somewhat accurate. This is definitely a big jump to make in a short time span, so it's not super realistic, but that's all right for the purpose of this demo. And the reason I chose Python for this is I'm trying to get into like some data science, data analysis stuff. Just seems like a fun detour to keep learning new things, and I wanted to get into graphing stuff. So here we can see I have the volume and the relative intensity. So volume is just weights times reps times sets, and then relative intensity, like I explained, is kind of a somewhat subjective measurement. And you can see here how the relative intensity is increasing over time as the volume is, even if the volume's getting lower. Like you can see here, the volume is not higher, it's like a little bit lower, and you want to kind of vary these two things. Like if I'm going to be pushing really, really intense stuff, I'm probably going to want to lower the volume a little bit just so I don't overtrain. And conversely, if I'm going with very low volume, I'm going to want to raise that intensity so I'm getting a good workout. And this little plugin can help you a lot, or package, sorry, if you're starting to feel like you're plateauing. And after about 6 months of consistent training, a lot of people feel their like the acceleration of their strength start to go down, and that's where you want to get creative with alternating volume and intensity And one of the mistakes people make is they don't focus on relative intensity, where they either shoot the weight up and do very few reps, so it's actually relatively easier than if they were doing more reps with a lighter weight, or they do the opposite and they just like go crazy with the reps and lower the weight, and they might be pushing too much intensity and not giving their body enough rest and recovery. So that's the main functionality of this plugin. I'll go into some of the files that I have here. So in the main directory, or the root directory, I've got commands.py, main.py, and setup.py. And then in my lib directory, I have all of my, I guess, library classes or functions and files. So let me go into commands.py, where you can see how click is being used. I just created a group CLI because there's only 5 or so commands. And you can add these options with prompts. And then what I really like is that you can have types. I'm trying to explore typed Python and be a little bit more deliberate with how I'm writing it, especially because it's such a flexible language. And one of the things that I tried to do here when I was writing these functions is almost use a sum or none type, kind of like a cheap imitation of that, where I have a list and a string, so that if the function succeeds, it will return the list, and if it doesn't, it will return a string. And because these are helper functions, when they get called by the CLI functions, it'll determine what the output is and echo a string out if there's a string, just so instead of getting an ugly error message, you get a message like malformed CSV or no file, and that kind of helps you determine what the issue is without getting a bunch of like panic standard error messages flashed, which just feels a little bit too unpolished. And I tried to do that for a couple of them and was able to kind of quote unquote pattern match, or just check to see what the output was. And then lift is just a simple class. I showed that in my last video on tmux, and it lets you calculate the volume and the highest relative intensity for a certain date or a day that you're working out. And then viz, just a simple matplotlib graph. Nothing too crazy, and if it can't do it, it'll return that string there. But there's nothing too advanced here. It was just kind of a mix of different packages. Wanted to make a CLI tool, wanted to do a little bit of data visualization, but as you can see, this is pretty simple. I wouldn't really consider this a data analysis project, but it has a graphical element, a CLI element, and a bit of a data element, so I was able to kind of cross all the T's for a fun little side project. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. If you want to install it, you can go to the GitHub repo. I think my GitHub is Cade Michael, and you can just clone it, install it with pip, install period editable, or you can just run the main.py like this, or you can alias main.py to whatever you want. Hope it helps for all the FOSS gigachads that are too strong to do regular workouts and need to focus more on periodization and, really programming their workouts, which is what it's called when you're taking into account all these things. They call it programming a workout. So wanted to program a workout programmer. All right, that's it for today. Thanks, guys.